giving you a little bit more insight into the grant timeline. I really want this to be as interactive as possible. My flight was delayed last night by many hours and I got in way after midnight, so I need some interaction here. More Earl Grey tea, I don't mind which, so it is. So let's make sure that if you have questions, raise your hand, and as long as they're on topic, we'll be fine. We'll be fine. Okay, so what do we talk about when we talk about mechanics, grant mechanics? Well, mechanics is really two things, isn't it? It's the parts of a machine, the mechanism of the working parts of something, and it's the branch of applied mathematics dealing with motion and forces. And motion and forces are really very important concepts here for our applying to NIH. There are motions that you will have that will push your grant forward, and there are forces that will guide you, that will sometimes drag you down a little bit, and will certainly can push you up as well. So we have to bear all of those things in mind. And I just want to make a point that is very, very important here, that when we talk about the review process, we are not talking about any single official at the NIH in the review process. The people you have to impress in the review process are peers. So when they say, oh, the NIH isn't interested, the NIH will give you a terrible summary statement. It's not the NIH at all. It's people, your professors, your colleagues, your mentors, people you've heard of or never heard of. They're the people who are going to be reviewing your grant. Or other experts, if you want to do something in, I don't know, infectious disease, and there may not be an emergency medicine person on that panel. So think about that for a moment. Now, we'll see that the program officer at NIH is vitally, vitally important for many, many reasons, but not because she is scoring your grant. That should be very clear. Okay. I thought what we would do, rather than have a separate discussion about how emergency medicine is doing, is to show you some of the metrics, and then we can understand that from this great big vegetable salad of names, we can actually whittle it down, and you'll see that it's really not that complicated. It really isn't. So you won't need to strap in for the next hour. It'll all become, I think, very, very clear. So how is emergency medicine doing at the NIH? This is a chart that shows 10 years worth of emergency medicine PIs. Now this means that the PI is a member of a department of emergency medicine. Okay? This is not all emergency care grants. For instance, you may be a cardiologist doing something in resuscitation. This does not measure that. This only measures somebody whose self-declared department is emergency medicine. And this is the number of submissions. This is the total amount of dollar support, and this is the number of the amount that's funded from each submission. And the red line is the important one, that you can see that over the years, from about 2013, when it was $20 million, to today, there's $43 million of new funding each year. Now remember, that's year one of a 3 or 5 year grant. So it means that NIH is spending probably 5 times that supporting emergency care research. It's a small drop in the bucket, but it's important. I will also point out that 2013 was the year that I got there, and 2017 happens to be this year, and it's doubled, so I don't know if there's a correlation.
Were you out of the country in 2010, 2011?
Yeah, sorry, what?
Were you out of the country in 2011, or?
Yeah, I think so. This is all the ARA. This is the big injection in the money. Now, it's an aggregate. It's a big numbers thing, so take it for what it is. But this is where we are, and I think it's a very, very nice place to be. We're on an up curve for now, and this is the latest data we have, 2017. FY18 is not yet closed, so hopefully we'll hear some more good things. So, what type of grants are we using at the NIH? Ben mentioned several of them. I've worked on a paper actually comparing emergency medicine with 4 or 5 other specialties: psych, peds, ortho, neuro, and family medicine. And so those are the comparators here. But you can see that the little pretty picture of emergency medicine grant types is pretty much paralleled by all the other institutes. So we do what basically everybody else does. We have a big bucket of U money. U is the cooperative mechanism. We'll talk about that. We have a much bigger bucket of the R grants and a smaller pool of the K grants. And that's basically what other people have, only they just have a heck of a lot more of it. And we could talk about why that is, but it's not our topic for today. So, yeah, they have a heck of a lot more of it, but we really mirror what they do. So, what is it then that if you whittle down those grant types, and there are dozens and dozens of grant types at NIH, each letter, Ks, there's dozens of many different kinds of Ks, and there's 9 different types of R grants, and there's U grants, and there's P grants, and there's S grants that I've never even heard of, and it goes on and on and on. But at the end of the day, 4 kinds of grants account for 65% of all emergency medicine PI's applications. And those 4 grants are R01s, which is the biggest chunk, over a third. K23s is the education grant that Ben was talking about. R21s, which is a small exploratory grant. And U01s, which are these cooperative mechanisms usually used by several PIs coming together to manage many, many institutions working on a project, like NET, for example, the Neurological Emergency Treatment Trials Network, is a U grant, or SIREN, the New Emergency Medicine Care Research Network. It's actually a U24, but it's just a different number on basically the same idea. So if we cover what these 4 grants are, you will pretty much have covered everything. Nobody in this room is currently going to apply for a K-12, because that means that you are leaving your institution and applying to NIH on behalf of your medical school or your university. Please give us money, we're going to train many other people. So don't worry about those grants, for instance. And K08, very small number. The K08s are the K23 for bench scientists. So if you're a PhD and you want to do bench work, that's the K08. Interestingly, just to confuse you a little bit, the AHRQ, the K08, is their K23. So if you're applying to AHRQ, you will actually be applying for a K08, but you won't be doing bench research, you'll do clinical research. But AHRQ, as I said, is a beast on its own. So we just have these 4 grant mechanisms, and we basically covered it. Does that mean everybody in the room will only apply for these grants? No. But for now, I think this is a very, very good place to start. So let's think about what is an R01. Ben was mentioning it simply earlier, but a little revision is a good thing. So the R01 is the most commonly used grant, and it's the oldest grant at NIH. And incidentally, and I think this is important, it's the grant by which it's the gold standard of you're an independent researcher. You'll hear somebody say, so-and-so is an R01 funded researcher. That's like a big deal. Now, you can be all kinds of other research, you can actually be doing much more research, but that's the gold, that's the goal to which I think many or most of us are working towards, and that's the one that gets you the prestige in the university and people start taking you more seriously. And so that's what the R01 is. Now, how does it work? You can just come up to NIH, write them a project, say, I have a brilliant idea, it's going to be an R01 mechanism, please fund me. And that's basically what most people do with their applications in R01s. The other mechanism is what's called a request for applications, that Ben mentioned earlier, which is we at NIH would like to see more grants in this area. So please give us your best grants. There is not always a set-aside amount of money that goes with that. If there's a set-aside money, that means we have $60 million to give out in this area. Please send us your best. And they're going to give out $60 million, even to the crappy ones if they don't get it, if nobody scores well. But a request for applications means that they're asking you to send us grants in a specific area. And a wonderful example of this is what happened in 2015-16 when NIH finally was allowed to fund gun control. So we went from zero grantees looking at this public health crisis called gun control and guns in America. 0 grants, and that was all, by the way, the fault of Arthur Kellerman. You know Arthur, he's a wonderfully respected senior figure in emergency medicine. He's now the dean of the University, USIS, yeah, it's the Uniformed Services. It's like the Army's medical school, over in Bethesda. Anyway, Arthur screwed it up because in 1993 she published a case control study which showed that having a gun not only does not make you safer, it actually increases your risk of death by 4 times. And that got, as a result of Arthur's kind generosity to the literature, basically the CDC got money pulled from it, and it was a catastrophe. And of course it was not doing it at all. But anyway, after the terrible Newton massacre, the NIH said, we'll take grants. And they put out a request for proposals, and they went from having 0 grants in the area, 0 applications, because no one was funding it. And you guys are smart. You say, I'm not going to go and apply for that. You may be passionate about it, but if there's no money in it, I'm not going to do it. So they went from 0 applications to 60 applications in 1 round. So if you prime the pump and you put money into something, you get results. And the first grant to be started was by, what's his name, Wintermute is Wintermute over in California. The leading, really expert on gun control and gun violence, and he's a emergency medicine physician. So requests for applications can be very, very useful. They don't happen very often because it is a huge, huge push uphill to get a request for applications through your institute at NIH. You know, that's the work that I do. If I were to say, we need more applications in, we need more applications in infectious disease in the emergency department, I would have to go to the infectious disease institute and convince them, and then convince one person, and their senior, it goes to a senior committee, and then there's another committee, eventually there's a sign-off. I mean, at any one stage, somebody could say, nah, we're not really into that, and then you're dead in the water. So it's very hard, but it does work. It does happen. The R01 plan is up to you, but of course it needs to align with the interests of the institute. Ben was right, there are 27 institutes at NIH. Each one has a mission statement, and it really behoves you to figure out what their mission statement is. You go online and you read it, not all of it, but the bits that apply to you, and then you do some grantsmanship, and you prove why your grant is dead center in line with the missions institute.
That was a huge pearl you just did, right? Like, restate their vision to them, right? Like,
terribly important, terribly important. And certainly if you're not going to do something that's squarely in their mission statement, explain why it's so good. It's very, very important thing for them to know about. Okay, so that's what you do. The amount of money is usually $500,000 or less, and it lasts 4 to 5 years. And you're on your own when you do this. You get no mentorship. It's your project. You run with it. If you want to have more, if your grant is more than $500,000 a year, you will have to get special permission. We won't talk about that now, but it does happen very often, especially when you do something in the clinical trial arena. An example of an R01 that was awarded just last year was to Ben's son from OHSU. He was looking at effectiveness of early diagnostic and disposition strategies for suspected acute coronary syndrome. It was awarded from the National Heart, Lung and Blood Institute, and it was in the region of $800,000. All publicly available information. I'm not telling you anything that you can't look up if you know where to look. So that's an example of an R01 from last year. Another example is from Bill Moyer from Michigan, who was looking at emergency department-initiated hypertension behavioral intervention. And his grant was from, and this is very, very interesting, very clever of him, NIMHD, which is an acronym that probably many of you are not aware of. It's the National Institute for Minority Health and Healthcare Disparities. Now, I haven't read the body of his grant, but I suspect he's targeting minorities. Or there's a bit they play with part of it. So there you're looking at a population, and you go to an institute, not the Heart, Lung and Blood Institute, who are tremendously interested in hypertension, but you're looking, and you go to the minority health and say, hey, we're targeting this population. This population is a major part of your portfolio, so please fund me. So again, very important that people please grantsmanship there. And so those are 2 examples of R01s. The next example, the next thing is the K-22, which is probably the most important thing as far as we're concerned in this room. The K-23 is to teach you how to be an investigator. Now, I'm being honest, you're all very smart people. You know, you can learn this. But this is a sort of a hand-holding approach. You have to apply, again, with a research idea, but this time you have a mentor, you have a mentor, or a couple, people who are going to advise you, and their CVs, their resumes are probably as important or more important than yours. So you have to have a mentor with a really, really good track record of mentoring people successfully, and the two of you, or the three of you, if you have a couple of mentors, they should be at your own location. That you can sometimes get away with one of them being a virtual mentor, but it's much better if they're at your location. And that gives you 3 to 5 years of supervised study. You can do a master's degree. You can take courses with it. And as I said, it's gone up. It's 100,000 plus fringe, plus up to research support for between $30,000 and $50,000 if you justify it. So it is a fairly nice chunk of change. As I say, you can do many, many things with this in your 3 to 5 years. And we've had a very good success rate, especially people who are lucky enough to be at institutes that have the K-12 award, the institutional award. We've been very, very successful, and it's a wonderful thing to be able to do. Although everything that Ben said about shares complaining about how much money it costs is absolutely true. It really is true. They whine about it, but don't worry about it. You have to be focused on what you need to do, and K23 is very important. Now, a couple of examples of the K23 is Kit Delgado from Penn. Penn was a K-12 site. He's looking at risky team behavior while driving. National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, $168,000. Now, you might say, well, this isn't really emergency medicine. This is sort of outside of the footage of my emergency department. Why is that emergency medicine? Well, remember, I'm giving you a portfolio analysis of everybody who is, by self-reporting, a member of an emergency department. So some of these people might be doing bench work, but you're saying, well, what the heck has that got to do with emergency medicine? Others might be doing work like this, which you might say, well, I understand we want to reduce traffic accidents, but anyway, this is in the portfolio because Kit is a member of the Department of Emergency Medicine, and we have a wonderful philosophical debate about what does we mean by emergency medicine. I would love to give that talk, but now is not the time. So, there's an example of the K23 from last year. Another one, Jonathan Elmo from Pitt, looking at electroencephalography after cardiac arrest from the institute that my office is in, the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke, NINDS, $188,000. So those are two examples of K23s. Now, the third most commonly used was the R21. And the R21 is a little grant, okay? It's a little grant that is intended to encourage you to explore data. You don't necessarily run the full trial, but you're sort of dipping your toe in the water and say, hey, there's something here, I want to get more data. I'm going to apply for a big grant, I hope. It's not used by everybody. And this is one of the frustrating things that you will learn, is that a grant mechanism that I've talked about or shown you at one institute, other institutes will say, oh, we never use that grant mechanism. Really? Yeah. Or they use it in a different way. So that's why you have to figure out what your institute uses. And not all institutes use the R21. Yeah.
Is it, when that happens, is it publicly available? Like, is that, you go to their website and they say, we do not do R21s? Or is it like you have to talk to a program officer to figure out, oh yeah, it technically exists, but no time in life?
Well, first of all, you should be never, and we're going to come back to this, you'd never be doing this without a program officer. By name, who you interact with. But it is usually publicly available. But you have to kind of dig around and look at the funding opportunity, and it's kind of buried in there. So not everybody uses it, but it's to get preparation for a bigger grant. It's fairly modest, $275,000. You can't get a renewal. For instance, if you get an R01 and you finish your 5 years, you've done great work, you can be renewed. This cannot be, and you don't necessarily need to use preliminary data. And this is the third most common mechanism used by our specialty of emergency medicine. An example of an R21 that was awarded last year was David Soxido from Pitt, looking at pre-hospital electrophysiology of overdose out-of-hospital cardiac arrest, again from the NHLBI for $129,000. The two largest funders of emergency medicine are the Heart, Lung and Blood Institute, NIH, and the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke, NINDS. Between those two, they fund about 75% of all the dollars spent on emergency medicine. So most likely that's the place that you're going to apply to now. There's 19 other places you could apply to. It's not only those two, but they account for about 75% of all the dollars spent on emergency medicine research. So there's an example of an R21 from last year. Another example is Ricky Ortega, and this is, goes to the question about somebody asked in the last session about international work. So Rick is looking at the characteristics and outcomes of TBI in the Ashanti region of Ghana. That's a pretty international project, right? You can all agree on that. And this was not funded by the Fogarty Center for International Research, but it was funded by NINDS because, as I mentioned, every institute has a certain percentage of money that they either have to, I'm not sure if that's true, or they need, or they like to spend on foreign grants, on international grants. So here's an example of just that, $160,000 for a couple of years for Ricky to start this particular group and area and TBI. The next thing, the third most commonly used grant is a UO1, and I will say right, oh sorry, please, yes.
I don't mean to derail the next topic, but do you know if the percentage of funding for international work applies to PCORI and ARC as well? Or?
I do not know. I do not know. I think PCORI does zero international work.
Yeah.
That's not in their mission, so I think I'm very confident to say zero. And I'm not sure about ARC. I would suspect it's very, very little.
Yeah.
Very, very little. So the UO1, now the UO1 is probably going to apply to nobody in this room, but I'll mention it because it's the fourth most commonly used mechanism. And it's really a cooperative agreement between the investigator and the NIH to do a big project. And the reason you have a cooperative agreement is the NIH says to you, you're good, we want to give you money, but we need a little bit more involvement. We want our guys to be part of the research team. We want a little bit more oversight. The R01, you get the money, away you go, report back to us with your publications in 3 years. We're good. The UO1 is, conference calls where the project officer is on the conference call, much more involved. And you looked at my calendar. I mean, there are several U grants that I'm part of monitoring, and it's every U grant, every group has 2-3 hours a week of calls, and if you're on 3 or 4 of them, your schedule gets pretty full very, very quickly. So that's the difference between an R grant and a U grant. This is a discrete project to be performed by a specific investigators in which substantial programmatic involvement is anticipated. And there are many different kinds of U grants. The UO1 is the most common, but basically there's a U24, which for all intents and purposes is exactly the same thing. I have no idea why you use one over the other.
So what do you mean by project? Is this like giant RCTs crossing multiple institutions, or like would development of a data resource?
Probably. Well, the most common reason to use this is because you are forming a network.
Yeah.
So SAEM is a U24, NET was a UO1. Yeah. But you have the other example, and I'll share this with you. Now, there were no UO1s awarded to emergency medicine last year, so I go back to 2016. And this is Lynn Richardson from Mount Sinai, who was forming a sickle cell implementation science consortium for almost $800,000 from NIH as a U mechanism. So you can see it's a much grander, somewhat more complicated, and certainly something that people who are much more senior should be applying for. It's hard to get this because you've got to manage a lot of people. You think it's hard enough to get your own grant completed and to motivate your own people sometimes. You've got to do this for 3 or 4 other institutions or 4 or 5 other departments within your institution. It's very challenging. So that's an example. Now, how do we do in terms of success? How does emergency medicine do in terms of success? So I took the 4 most commonly used grants that we spoke about. The R01, if you look at all the other specialties, about 90% success rate, emergency medicine, 15%. I have no idea if that is statistically significant or not. I should say it's a little bit lower. And most recently, 15% in last year's grants. K23s, most specialties get a 30%. We have a 42% hit rate. That's remarkable. That's remarkable for a K23. 42% of K23s are getting awarded, usually on their second go-round, because you can apply for a grant twice. And if it doesn't get if it gets rejected both times, you can put it in again. It's a different, you can do different, or tweak it a bit and put it in again, no problem. That's a new rule. So 42% hit, and last year 45%, as opposed to everybody else who was getting 38%. Is that statistically significant? I do not know, but that's what it is. So K's is very good news. R's a little bit lower, and the U mechanism a little bit higher, although last year we didn't get any. So, you know, we're basically mirror what's happening at NIH overall with, you know, some more successes. And the K's are really a good, I think a very good message to give you guys is to have a good hit rate. Okay, you persevere, as Ben was saying, you're going to do well. So that's the background. Feel free to follow up with questions or to find me. I'm going to be here until Thursday afternoon. Happy to sit down and talk and go over things. That's my job, and it's my passion, and I'm happy to work with any of you to try and find your place at NIH. So now, with that background, let's talk a little bit about the actual grant process itself and how do these mechanics work. And I've lost the, oh, here it is. Right, here we go. Right. So I jotted down the steps from an idea to submission. And this is sort of the rough sketch of it. Now you have it. I'll send it to you as a PDF when we're done, right? That's how it works. But actually, what we need to do is to go through each of these little areas and lines, and that's what we're going to do for the next few minutes. So I'm going to talk you through from an idea to successful funding in the next few minutes. So strap in, and here we go. So how do we begin? And by the way, what I will do is I will use my own background and my own R01 as an example, just to help you. There are many others. Okay, so everything begins, of course, with an idea. The idea that I had was looking at tamsulosin for renal colic. How many of you are prescribing tamsulosin for renal colic? Come on, don't be shy. Come on, higher up. Okay, what, a third of you? Okay. So I come to George Washington University in 2002, and I work at the Bethesda Naval Hospital, which is now called the Bethesda Naval Hospital Walter Reed Center of Military Excellence Hospital, or something like that. It combined with Intrepid, or there's a word intrepid in there somewhere. The military likes to use the word intrepid, so there's probably intrepid something. Anyway, I come there, I'm working in the ER. It's a normal day. I have a patient with kidney stone, no problem, discharging. A urologist, I don't even know why the urologist was there, Steve Jackman from Pitt, overhears me saying, so put the patient on tamsulosin. Never asked him, mind your own business. I don't know what tamsulosin is. I trained in Boston, so we didn't use tamsulosin there, and everything comes from Boston. If they're not doing it in Boston, then nobody should be doing it because that's the mental. So what is he talking about? But it was kind of intriguing to me. So I asked myself, does anybody else do this? I'm at the next faculty meeting at George Washington University and say, hey, I have this really strange thing. This guy told me to tamsulosin, like, is this a geographical thing? I comes from Boston, and maybe, you know, places have their own unique ways of doing things. Anybody else doing this, and nobody had heard of it. So I figured the guy's a bozo. He's a clown, he's out there, he's a cowboy, and sort of forgot about it, but then I was still kind of interested. So you do a literature review. So you go from an idea to talking about it to your colleagues to doing a literature, and that's PubMed. And I did a little research, and it turns out there were several papers from Italians on kidney stones and the success of tamsulosin. Actually, tamsulosin and steroids. Not the things that we do in the US, what they did in their studies where they admitted all the patients with kidney stones, I'm not making this up, gave them daily KUBs, I'm not making this up, we're talking about 1990, these papers in the mid-90s, and then followed the stone and then said, yes, it's successful, you know, it's very successful. So I then formulated the clinical or basic research question, which is, what is really the effect of tamsulosin and steroids on renal colic, on stone expulsion? And as you know, tamsulosin is an alpha-1 blocker, so it relaxes the ureter, so you don't get spasm, and the steroids reduce the inflammation, so it all kind of makes sense. And that was my research question. Now, two things you can do to look and see if anybody else has done this, and you should definitely be looking at this as the NIH reporter. I don't know if I can go online here, so type in NIH reporter, and it will give you a list of dozens, maybe hundreds of different categories of research. And one of those, an early success of the Office of Emergency Care Research, is emergency care research. There is a link to all projects that the NIH reporter thinks is emergency care research. You click on it, you'll get hundreds of links. Most of them will be dummies. They shouldn't be in there. It's very sensitive and not very specific. But within there will be every funded study that the NIH thinks is in this category. And it's another place that you guys should look, or look at the specific Ds. If you're interested in, cardiac arrest, type in cardiac, find the thing that says cardiac arrest. There are 217 different categories. West Nile virus, you might want to type in and see all the research that's being spent on that. So this is a very good place to look. The other good place to look is my website, which is currently being reconstructed because I moved from one institute to another, so I have to take my website with me. But on that site there was, and I hope there will be, a drop-down link where you can look up all the people by name, by specialty, or by grant type. So if you figured out, I'm going to write an R21, you can look up on my website and see who got R21s in your area, the name of the person, and then a good idea to contact that person or somebody in your institute who has an R21 and get some help writing it. So that's how the idea went from me seeing somebody in the ER doing something I didn't really understand, talking about it to my friends, doing some background research, and coming up and formulating a research question. It turns out that Steve Jackman wasn't the bozo. I was. He was actually ahead of the game. He read all these papers and he was convinced, and there you go. So that's how we move from the idea. So we have an idea, but of course the idea needs to be funded. So this is an important question that we really need to ask ourselves. What do you need the money for? Why do you need to be funded? It's an important question to ask, right? Well, I need to be funded because I need to get protected time. That's an important question. I've got to make a living. If I'm not working in the ER doing my shifts, I'm not making enough money, and I have to do that. It's very reasonable. But not every study needs money. You can do it sweat equity. You can have students help you. You can have undergrads help you. The key here is actually to get pre-med students to help you, not medical students. They're useless. They're useless because they're where they need to be. They're not interested in that. Pre-med student? Oh my gosh. Fabulous, fabulous resource. I actually taught a class on theory and practice of clinical research to pre-med students who also then staff the ED doing research. This is the Research Associates project that some of you have. Started by Judd Hollander. I went up to Penn and basically took all his documents with his permission and started the program at GW. It was fabulous. Fabulous for many reasons, not the least of which was I got a huge chunk of salary support from running that program. So, anyway, pre-med students are your key here. That says sweat equity. You may not need money for anything, for a little project. Get yourself a publication, get your toe in the water, foot in the door, and away you go. Other places you could look at for as Ben was saying, pharma, your hospital, state funds, foundations have a great deal of money. Hundreds of billions of dollars sit in various foundations. Some of which you'll know and you'll have heard of. Some of which you'll have to Google around and figure out, I never even heard of that. You'll talk to them and you'll see if you can get some money from them. And that's no less important, by the way, than the NIH. Showing that you've gotten private funding is very important too. But why would I want to get funding from the NIH as opposed to I'd do it with, private funding? And the answer is, there's several reasons to get it. First of all, let's be honest. It's prestigious. Your institute, your chair, your colleagues will be impressed with you when you tell them you've got a K23, an R01, they'll be really impressed. And so it's prestigious. It'll help you with academic promotion. I remember when I was awarded my R01, all of a sudden the dean took an interest. I'm not making this up. The dean was, how you doing? My chair sort of perked up a little bit. Not that he was terribly interested in research at all, but once I told him how much indirects were coming in, he was very interested. And there can be substantial indirects. The indirects are the cost. You'll apply for a grant, you'll put in a budget. Over and above that budget, NIH will give your institute a percentage. Now, most of the places range from 40 to 80% on top of the money that you're getting. So for every dollar that you're bringing in another 50 to 80 cents to your institution. So I got a $4.2 million grant. That means I brought in, we had, I think, a 56% indirect. Every institution is a little bit different. Harvard somehow was an 80% indirect. Last I had an 80% indirect rate. Some places, outside, let's say outside big urban, or big cities will have a lower indirect rate. And the indirect is basically the cost of keeping the lights on and paying the janitorial staff and all those things you need for support. So I got $4 million. I guess I think about 1.8 of that was indirect. So I was bringing in $1.8 million to the hospital. And what were they giving to the GW? What were they giving me for that? I didn't have a lab. I didn't hire a single person. I was still doing clinical shifts. I just gave them $1.8 million. And you'll do the same with your own R grants. So they're very interested in that, right? Now, does that money trickle back to your department? Sometimes. Depends how your chair figures out. The dean takes a slice, and then the medical school takes a slice, and some of it will trickle back to the department. So it's a very, it's a nice way of getting money to a department, but not very much. So it's prestigious, it can help with academic promotion, and the results can be substantial indirect costs to your institution that makes you very, very popular. Problem is it's slow, and as we said, the success rate for R01s is only around 15%. So you have to weigh that up. It's worth pointing out that there's an NIH definition of a clinical trial. This is new. This is starting in January 2018. It caused a huge fuss at NIH because when they redefined what a clinical trial is, they have included a huge basket of mostly social sciences research, but other as well, which went from just being, no need for an IRB other than just to get it to a definition now of clinical research. So, if you're doing an intervention in your lab with undergraduates and you're assigning one group to watch movie A and then talk about their feelings towards minorities and another group towards B and female, that could technically be a clinical trial. Right? Because here's the definition. One or more human subjects are prospectively assigned to one or more interventions to evaluate these on health-related, biomedical, or behavioral outcomes. So this is a very, very expansive definition. And some institutes will not allow their K23 awardees to do a clinical trial. So it gets a little bit more complicated. But that's the definition of the new definition of a clinical trial at NIH. This is January 18, and again, one more thing to think about. Yeah?
Is there an upside to that also? Like, does that, or clinical trials, my sense is in general, like, as an economist looking in, that like clinical trials are a lot easier to fund than other kinds of things?
Actually, they're a lot harder.
Okay.
They're a heck of a lot harder.
Okay.
Yeah. Clinical trials, I think, are much, much harder than your basic lab stuff. Of course, there are more people applying for basic lab stuff, but the bar is set very high. For example, at NANDS, the council, which is the board of directors that meet 3 times a year, has to review every single clinical trial. We have to bring it to council and stand up in front of them and say, okay, this is the clinical trial we're doing, it got funded, this is the amount it got funded, this is what the score was, it's really good, and they review it. They don't do that with every basic grant, they don't do that with every, behavioral intervention grant. So yes, clinical trials get a much, much, much more scrutiny. So there's a more expansive definition of an NIH clinical trial. And then you just have to basically answer these 4 questions, and then you'll figure out, am I doing it on humans? If you're not doing it on humans, it's not a clinical trial. Am I prospectively assigning to an intervention? So if you're doing a cohort study, right, you're just watching people, it's not a clinical intervention. Is the study designed to evaluate the effect of an intervention? Am I intervening and I'm measuring that effect? And if it's yes, it's a clinical trial. You have to say yes to all 4 things. And is it a health-related or behavioral outcome? So if it's an economic outcome, may or may not be a clinical trial, probably enough. Because it has to be an outcome of biomedical or behavioral outcome. But if you're doing research on how to get people to pay their taxes more honestly, by making them sign at the beginning and saying, I declare everything is true in my tax form, rather than sign at the end that I declare it true in my tax form. The former actually produces far more honest tax returns than the latter. Dan Ariely has written about this, that might be actually a clinical research study, because if they're NIH funded, you're looking at a behavioral outcome. So anyway, think about that, and it's just another little bit more complexity, but your project officer will help you figure it out. Okay. So where am I going to apply? As we said, NIH has 27 institutes, and the important thing here, the very important thing here, the most startling thing to me when I first started working at NIH is each institute has its own separate ways of doing things. They will use one grant mechanism, but not another. They'll take this kind of research, but not that. And of course, they're focused on their area. Okay, so you can't apply to the National Eye Institute for research on stroke, and vice versa. So you have to figure out which institute. Usually it's completely self-evident. It's not hard to figure out. If I'm doing a study on kids, I probably want to go to the institute that focuses on kids. But it gets complicated, right? Because what if I'm doing a study on kids and I'm looking at the stroke rate in kids with sickle cell? Is that a kid study? Is it a blood study? If it's blood, it goes to the National Heart, Lung and Blood. Is it kids? Maybe I could do both. Doing both is a lovely idea. It's very challenging to get both institutes to sign on, even though everybody's supposed to play in the same sandbox. It's challenging. So that's where you have to sort of figure it out and talk to a couple of people. But usually it's very, very evident which of these institutes you will need to apply to. And as I said, you know, heart, lung and blood, neurology account for about 75 to 80, and the other 20% is somewhere between child health and human development. Aging is a big one, and a couple of others. Cancer, almost none. Basically, zero. But we're hoping to fix that. So, these are the institutes. You have to figure out which institute, and then you have to figure out who the project officer is, and we'll go there soon. So, if your idea seems like a good fit, if the NIH seems a good fit, what's the next thing to do? Well, the next thing to do is get yourselves a copy of a successful application. It's hard to do one of these things. How many of you have seen an application to the NIH? I won't say oh, you've all seen good. Because I won't say physically held, because back in my day, and this is going to date me, you had to send them 11 or 18 paper copies of your thing. And I remember very clearly, lies on my knees in my office, making these piles of photocopies. Now it's much easier. Now it's done by electronically. But get a copy. Best thing is to get a copy of somebody who's either applied to the same institute as you, or applying to, or is using the same mechanism as you, and they may or may not give it to you. I asked Arthur Kellerman when I wrote mine, I knew him, the same Arthur Kellerman who screwed it up, gun control. I said, look, I'm applying for an R01, it's about kidney disease, about renal colic, don't worry about it. You just got an R01 in something to do with head trauma and traumatic brain injury and progesterone at the beginning of the process of that study. I have no idea. Would you mind sharing your copy with me? And he really didn't know me that well. And he said, sure, he redacted certain things about salary, fine. And he sent me a paper copy, and I used that as a foundation to build on. So it's incredibly important. So look on Reporter who else is doing it. It doesn't have to be in your area. And remember, don't get it original, get it right. Go up to somebody, a psychologist or a psychiatrist in your hospital, and say, hey, I understand you've got an R01, I'm applying. Could I borrow, can I see your grant to know how to do it? Very, very, very good trick. And then meet with your academic research office, because they have a lot of experience in getting applications through. There is a lot of technical work that goes into uploading your grant into Cailloux or whatever system you use. You need to count a couple, 2, 3, 4 weeks probably to get this through your own system of layers of signatures. Again, naively I thought, okay, I get my grant, I put it in the mail, send it in, we're done. No, that's not how it happens at all. So you can't go on Wednesday and say, hey, this needs to be in by Friday, sign off on it. It doesn't happen. So make sure that you are talking to your academic research office. They're usually very, very helpful, and you can't really move forward without them. And then, of course, you start writing. Assume a much earlier deadline. There are usually 3 deadlines per year, so once every 4 months. And assume an earlier deadline. If it has to be by, June 3rd, assume your deadline is, a month before at least. The research strategy is limited to 12 pages. So you only have 12 pages to describe your background and everything. Not That does not include all the CVs you're going to upload and the references and the budgetary stuff. That's multiples more. The R21 is only 6 pages, so you've got to be succinct. And again, remember that people use different mechanisms. You have to include other stuff like your bio sketch, your budget page, sometimes your IRB, sometimes contracts, and then you form a budget and indirect. You figure out how much money you're going to need to run this thing. Make sure that you ask for enough money. If you don't get enough money to run your project properly, you're not going to get good, you're not going to get the results. So you don't rely on the script and say, if you need a person to do X and you can justify it, get that person. Otherwise, you'll be shooting yourself in the foot. As we said, you talk to your project officer and then figure out which mechanism, and we've discussed that too. So this is what we do next. So what happens once the submission is written? Have your colleagues, people at your institute, friends, spouses, seriously, spouses, do you understand this? Does this make sense? Could I do better? And then you get a cover letter and you decide which study section. Now, study section is usually assigned by the NIH itself. You just send in your study and they will assign your project, your grant application to one of about 170 different study sections. And who are in the study section? Peers. Remember that. Goes to about 100, and depending on what your area is, they're very focused. They have basic study sections that only look at ribosomes, and basic study sections that only review grants and are looking at the Golgi apparatus, and then they have clinical study sections. And what you can do is you can ask for a specific study section or not. It's up to you. But one very, very important thing is to describe any expertise that you need. Study sections are completely open. You can see who is sitting on each study section. You will not know who's reviewed your grant, but you will know who's on that study section. And if you're doing something in pediatric emergency care, and there's not a single pediatrician and or a single emergency medicine pediatrician, you are, again, not going to get the kind of review that you need. So you'll ask it, and listen, I need somebody with this expertise. I'm doing something with bubble chambers, and whatever it is, you can't name the person by name. You can't request my friend Joe. But you can say, I need somebody with this expertise. And the Center for Scientific Review would like to do the right thing by you. Also, you can appeal a study, you can appeal a review if you think you've got an unfair score, but we try not to do that. And that's where also I can come in, I can help you figure out if you need that or not. So really, really think about that if you need any unusual expertise. And really by unusual, you mean anybody in your field, okay? Because you really don't want your grant to be reviewed by the people who don't have that background. And then, the other thing you could do is become an early career reviewer. Now, if you go online and look up early career reviewer, you will be able to put yourself down for a junior study section member, which is a fabulous thing to do. A, you review loads of grants and see how the heck people write grants, right? You see how they're scored, you see what the discussion is like within the study section. It's fabulous, and you can actually join this. There's a link, just type in NIH Early Career Reviewer, and you should get to the right place. And it's no guarantee they'll call you. I think you have to nudge a little bit, because there's a lot of people who want to do this. But it's a wonderful thing for your resume. It's fascinating, and it'll improve your grant writing.
Can you pick or at least request which study section?
I think so. I'm not sure, but I think so.
You can list actually up to 4 study sections that you think you would contribute to in order.
That's correct, thank you. Has anyone done this? Yeah? And you actually standing on the study section?
I haven't yet, but I only put it in not that long ago. There's only been 1 cycle or 2 cycles since I've done it.
Well, that's wonderful. Yeah, it's really... I love sitting in on study section meetings. They go on all day, literally 8 to 5, sometimes 2 days. But you learn so much. Of course, as the NIH official, I'm not allowed to say anything. I see you saying something really ridiculous, and I can't say anything. Right? But it's fascinating. Yeah?
So one, I'm assuming, is unpaid.
It is unpaid. Oh no, it is. I mean, you get like $100 or I don't know. It's like $150. You're not going to make money on this. You get your flights, you get your hotel, and it's pittance.
Okay. And then I was going to ask the time commitment. You mentioned like an 8 to 5.
It's one meeting. It's one meeting. Remember, there's only 4 reviews a year, 3 reviews a year, and you maybe only need to come to 1 day. You're asking for like 2 days a year, basically. right? They're usually in the Washington.
Building, yeah, the review is what kills you, right? Like, because that's, I mean, days to read it.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
You have to do
it
the
right,
reviews.
you should do it right.
They'll get you the stuff on CDs or down there. Endlessly fascinating.
Don't downplay the benefit of reading other people's grants, though. Granted,
Yeah.
while that is you working on someone else's project, it is you building up sort of a repertoire. So it seems like a lot of work that is not related to your direct research, but it will pay off.
So, and then you submit it to your research office. Don't wait till the last minute. There was a very good university that applied for a certain grant mechanism, and they applied on the last day. They thought they just pressed send, their system was down. The grant was rejected. And they said, oh, I thought the system's down. Why didn't you? Can't wait till. And the grant was rejected. And it's a very, very unfortunate thing. So don't let that happen to you, please. So then you submit it through your research office. They have to press the send button. And then what happens? Well, then what happens is you wait. It takes quite a long time. And here's what happens. From the time when you apply, which is zero, taking 3 to 6 months in your pre-application project for, writing the thing, getting feedback. You submit at month 0. It then gets referred to a study section. That takes 2 months. Study sections are either formed by the Center for Scientific Review, which is one of those 27 institutes. Their job is to manage those 170 study sections, or the institute has its own special study section that it puts together, and it arranges and it invites people onto for special review. And there's a great many of those too. For instance, the SAEM was a special review that NIH put together. The Center for Scientific Review had nothing to do with it. We put together a special panel. We made all the arrangements. We've got the tickets for everybody. We did that. Okay. So that's referral. And about 2 months after referral is the meeting that we're talking about, where the group of your peers come together and they sit and deliberate on each. Then you get a summary statement about a month or so after that. A summary statement is what Ben called the pitch sheet, which is a review of your grant and what they thought about it. If they like it and it's funded, it then goes to the council, which is, as I said, think of them as the board of directors of each institute. They rubber stamp it, and quite honestly, they don't really look at it. They look at the big ticket items. They may look at all clinical research, depending on what their institute policy is. And they may look at grants that are potentially dangerous to the institute, but usually those are weeded out. And I'm talking about politically dangerous, because congressmen and senators like nothing more than getting their staff people to come through NIH grants, find grants that sound silly to them, and then ping Francis Congress on why this particular grant was funded with taxpayer money. It's a favourite thing that they do. So we weed those out, or we change the titles or something, and then they make the funding. Yes, what happens. So we're not looking at kissing amongst macaque monkeys. We're looking at okay. So and then there's the funding decision, which comes from the institute. Again, your summary statement will be released, and then you will get the actual decision as to whether or not you've been funded, and then you'll get you can then reapply and start again, or you start your project and you do the progress report yearly. And away you go. So it's a very, very lengthy process. It takes somewhere between starting the idea and getting the thing at least a year. It's a very lengthy process, and it's frustrating. Why does it take a year? Well, each of these steps, if you actually look at what goes on, it's a very complicated process. They can't put together study groups until they see what's come in. Often, if it's a special study group, and so it's hard. It's really hard, and there's a lot of deliberation that goes on behind the scenes. We'll talk about that now. So how are grants funded? Well, you get these 5 areas: significance, approach, innovation, the investigator, environment. And then they get a score. And in a remarkable NIH universe, the lower the score, the better the project. So low score is good. And then you get an impact score. Every application is assigned to at least 3 reviewers who will review it on that study section. Usually they start off by triaging the bottom half the bottom half of grants within that, let's say you're in the study section and there are 20 grants to review, which is complete. The bottom half of those grants where the people have said, no, this is not worth funding, are triage, meaning we're not even going to discuss them at study section. You go, oh crap, what was I doing there? Because you'll get a summary statement. It's still going to get that summary statement, and you'll see why they didn't discuss it, which is terribly important. But at least half the grants will not get discussed, and then the top half then get discussed and scored. So that's what happens at review. And then you get a score, and then you get a summary statement. Now let's look at a summary statement briefly. So where are those?
I think you guys should have them there.
Okay.
So it could say summary statement.
I just need one to, okay. So this is a summary statement from a long time ago. It's 2005 to a guy called Jeremy Brown from the George Washington University. So that's me. Now these are privileged. Nobody else sees these. It's your private thing. These are not publicly available. I'm happy to share it with you. But I don't have to, and you can't find it anywhere. So this is my summary statement, looking at, again, kidney stones for renal colic. I got a priority score of 255, a percentile, and then I got the kiss of death. If you look on page 1, it says human subjects, 44. Human subjects involved SRG concerns. They thought I wasn't doing the right thing on human subjects. If you get that, that's the kiss of death. Doesn't matter if you're going to cure cancer. If you're doing it the wrong way in human subjects, we're not going to give you the money. Why do they think it was human subject concerns? How many of you prescribe prednisone for your patients with asthma? Prednisone. How many do you do? Nearly all of you. 60 milligrams 5 times, for 5 days. Does that seem about reasonable? Yeah. So that I suggested doing 60 milligrams of prednisone for 5 days as the steroid component, and they review this and they go, holy crap, that's a really dangerous thing to do. You can't do that. No, I'm serious. You can't be doing that. That's a human subject's concern. Now, I wasn't getting a fair review, right? That was not a fair review. That was a silly thing to say. But, your review will not always be fair. Okay? Your peers are only human. They know what they know. The problem is they don't know. All right. So anyway, you can see the gender was scientifically unacceptable because I wasn't doing a pregnancy test on all women before I gave them the steroids. I don't know if you guys do a pregnancy test on your female patients with asthma before you give them your go-home pack of 60 milligrams at 5 days. If you're not doing that, apparently that's unacceptable. But I wasn't doing it either. Okay, so that's what you got. And then you get these 3 critiques. So if you turn to page 2, you can see it's like this. There's a resume, and it says, and this is the first review, and he says, or she says, also a major concern is that patient females are not excluded in the study, an important issue because corticosteroids are teratogenic. Maybe if I'm giving you it for a couple of years and something weird happens, then you get, I don't know, but really? All right. But then you can see the significance. For instance, if you look at the significance, they say cost savings will be big. They're basically copying and pasting what you wrote your significance would be. Right? That's basically what they're doing. The approach, they said it's a very well-designed trial, inclusive enough to represent the majority of 1.1 million stone patients who get care each year. 1.1 million patients come to the ER with kidney stones. How do they know that? Oh, my God, it's all cut and pasted. Page 3, innovation. Not very innovative. It's a clinical trial, for God's sake. What do you want me to do? I mean, it's innovative clinical trial, and they thought it was very innovative. All right, fine. Me, the investigator, not embarrassing. The PI has published very little research. It's kind of true. But obviously has consulted with many experienced researchers preparing this proposal. That was true. I had not got a K award. I had not got an MPH. I went to medical school, I did residencies, became an attending. Here I was applying for an ROI in 2005. I probably couldn't get away with it this time, and I think everything that Ben said is true, but they thought I wasn't terribly good, but I'd spoken to the right people. And the last page...
Sorry, how did you demonstrate? Like, are they doing that because those are people on the research team, or are they doing that because they're inferring from the quality of the proposal? You know what I mean? Like,
they're referring what?
well, so they say, has obviously consulted, like, how is it?
Yeah, I only know that because I got letters of support from urologists, right? And actually, so basically I got an unscored first thing. I revised, I took care of all these things, I revised, it got funded second time. So you went from a non-funded score to a $4 million grant. And one of the things I did was I got more letters, something else, so there's apparently this professor, I can't remember her name, she was down at UT Texas. She was the big brain in kidney stones, and somebody, I think Steve Jackman, remember the guy, the bozo who, he ended up being a co-PI with me because I invited him to do the study. So I wrote to this lady and I said, "Can you just write me a letter of support, please? I'm not going to pay you anything." And she did. Right? And I put it in the file, and they go, "Oh, she's," because these are basically urologists reviewing this, so they all know this person. And they go, "Oh, that's very impressive." So that's how they come up with it.
Jeremy,
yeah.
So I just want to point out that Jeremy actually didn't have a K award before he went into R, and I think that Jeremy, do you know what percentage of R's actually now have K awards?
Yeah, we kind of discussed that. It's a backwards question of K to R's. Is R's from K? No, I don't. I don't think it's terribly hard to find. I'm going to do some homework actually. I'm going to get a coffee, do some homework, and figure it out. And maybe I'll come back later today. Maybe you could figure it out. Okay. And then finally.
We think that number around 50% is what
that's
I've
impressive.
been told in the past on several different.
Well, if it's true, then you've got a 40% chance of getting your K and a 50% chance of submitting it to an R. That's pretty nice. That's a pretty good rate. And finally, you can see that I wasn't including women. I wasn't excluding women, and they told me that protection of human subjects was unacceptable, and the inclusion of women was unacceptable. So, kiss of death, but that's what a summary statement looks like. That's what everybody gets, whether or not your study was reviewed at study selection. Okay? So, okay, what happens next? Okay, we have, by my clock, 10 minutes to go. You'll get a number, and all grants that get a specific score will be funded. Remember, the lower the score, the better. So here, for example, is what the NIH says. The most important factor in determining whether you get a grant is how it was judged. And we award grants in strict order of percentiles. So let's keep the top grant gets funded. The second top grant gets funded. All the way up to a certain number, the 15th percentile. So 85% of the grants do not get funded. The 15th, if you go 15th or better, you get funded. Unless it's a set-aside, an RFA with set-asides, when we fund them we fund the applications in score order until we use up all the money. So even if the reviewers didn't give it a terribly good score, let's say they gave the best scores of 30, and usually your institute only funds 15 or lower, they would look at this and say, 30? That's a crappy score. We're funding it because you have set-asides. So that's why set-asides are a much harder thing to find at NIH, because people don't want to do that. They don't want to say, let's put this money away, and however crappy the grants are, we're going to fund at least one of them. So people are reluctant to do that. Okay, so basically, you get a number, and if you're within that pay range, you get funded, if not, not. But selected pay enables the institute to fund a small number of programmatically important R01s, and that's really, really important. A programmatically important R01 is something that the institute thinks, well, it didn't score exactly where we wanted it to score, but it's really important grant. And in choosing those, we look at relevance to our mission, merit, and whether an investigator is new. We're going to come back to that in just a moment. Whether an investigator is new is very, very important. Okay, so this is why you need to be on very good terms with your project officer. Okay, none of this should be happening. None of the steps that I've mentioned to you should be happening, certainly not the first step of applying to NIH until you have found and spoken with a project officer. They are key. Not only will they tell you whether or not their institute does this and whether or not they're the right fit, they'll tell you if they're not the right fit and send you to the person they think is the right fit. That's usually the number one move they do. They say, no, not for us, but go there because they've got a lot of work. And they'll tell you, they'll give you advice, they'll talk to you on the phone. And, they're humans, so some of them are great, personable, wonderful people, and one of them group should have been, no offense, but computer programmers. They just don't have those wonderful interpersonal skills. They're much more happy in front of a machine. Okay, but most of them are very good. And so here, for example, NIGMS also takes the score into account, but not like that other one I just showed you. The Infectious Disease Institute says we just fund by the numbers. If you're in that score, we fund you. And then GMS says, no, we don't fund by the numbers. We take the numbers into account, but there's other stuff we look at too. And one of those other things is council advice, novelty, and all these other things. Therefore, we look at range of applications either side of the pay line. So if we fund 15, we may fund a little bit more. We'll go out of order, and that's up to us. And that's why you need a project officer, because she will advocate for you in that meeting. Here's what I mean. Let's say you're an ANDS, and they fund up to here, right? So everything here gets funded. Boom, no question, that's it. It got scored, we fund it. What about people here? We have a little bit of money left over. There are going to be some grants in the 15 to 25 score. They're still going to fund. How will they fund that? Because your project officer will sit in a meeting with her peers, with her group, and say, we need to fund this. I really like it. I don't think it got a great review because of this reason. Or I think it's fixable. We really should fund this. And if you can persuade them, you can be out here and still get funded. So not only are they a great resource for you and they're wonderful people to talk to and they know the system, they'll advocate for you, so be on very good terms with them. Don't send them gifts over the value of $18, but they'll advocate for you. So tremendously true. And a lot of people don't understand this. You know, I've spoken to many people who said, oh, I just sent a grant into NIH. And I said, well, okay, who's your project officer? I don't know, I never found one. I mean, it's like, this is the most important things you can do, right? So you don't need to do this. You can just send it to NIH and not even ask them which institute you want it to go to, not even ask them which study section, not even spoken. We will look at it. We have to look at it. But that's going to have a very, very hard time because of this other thing that they can provide. So that's NANDS pay line. NHLBI, the heart, lung, and blood, uses one of two methods, depending. It's either pay line, up to a score, or a zone of consideration. Again, there's a zone of grants where, depending on the availability of funds, we will make funding decisions on competing applications above the pay line through selected pay actions. Selected pay actions are exactly that, a little bit more money for those grants that need to be advocated, and that's why your PO is very important. Another thing to think about, very importantly, is that there's often more money at the end of the year than the beginning of the year. Doesn't mean you should apply at the end of the year, but the reason there's more money at the end of the year is, you know, funds didn't get used up exactly, or the government finally gave us appropriations. So, for instance, for the last countless number of years, we've been going on not appropriated money. And basically, the rule is you just use what you had last year. Well, then suddenly you actually get appropriated money, the government's actually working, which is quite a rare thing. But if they actually appropriate money, it means NIH has a budget. If you have a budget, you can then, oh, we've got a little bit more, we can spend more, and that might come later in the year. Or there'll be like money you found in seat cushions, right? So sometimes your grant will be it didn't get funded under the first council, but it's in somebody's back pocket. And they'll bring it up again if there's extra money at the end of the year. So again, supremely important to be speaking with somebody. Okay. So
Couple of questions.
sure, sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Fiscal year, calendar year, fiscal year.
Fiscal year. So a lot of funding happens around May, June time. It's kind of fun actually. Yeah. I like that, I don't like that. She's great, he's not so good. How do you know? Well, I met him in a coffee bar once. He didn't seem like a very nice guy. So that kind of thing. And this will tell you the scores of what you need. Now, at NHLBI, you've got to have an R01 of 15 or better, but an ESI, an early investigator, can go out to 25. This is very, very important. And let's talk about new investigators. These are people who are within 10 years of a residency, PhD, or, and this is important, fellowship. So the clock does not start until you finish your fellowship. Okay? And you haven't gotten a certain award. You can still get some awards at NIH and still be an early stage investigator. And how do we figure it out? You actually have to type all your information into something called ERA Commons, which is a record of who you are, and the computer, literally, the computer calculates if you're an early stage investigator or not. Why is this important? This is important because you will get up to 10 points extra if you do it. So your score could have been a 25 out of the funding range. You're an ESI, 15 funded. Simple as that. Simple as that. So it's a very important thing to think about, to use, to make sure you use that. Don't get on a grant if it's going to mean that you can't later apply as an ESI. Don't do that. Be a co-I, but don't be a PI, because then you'll screw up your ESI status. Very, very important thing. And this makes sense. NIH has been pushing a lot to get younger investigators involved. Congress has been pushing a lot for this. So that's why the whole ESI project, which really began in the last few years, has really taken off. So the compute, you can call me up and ask me if I'm an ESI. I'll probably give you the right answer, but I may not. The computer spits it out once you go online. And so really, really use that. Okay, we've spoken about the role of the project officer. So once you get your summary statement back, and most summary statements are going to be not funded, right, for whatever reason, then you talk to her and say, okay, well, what do you think, you know? Is it fixable? Is it not fixable? She will have read a ton before. So ask about the probability of funding, like if it's close. Yeah, it was 15, but I got an 18. What do you think? She may say, no, I think we can pull this off. Or not. You can also ask, going forward, if they were at the meeting, at the review meeting, as an observer. That's something that many PI, all project officers do actually, unless there's a compelling reason not to. They go to the meeting and they sit there quietly and take notes. And then it'll become a source of additional information. Then they say something like, yeah, you know, I was in the review. There was just one guy who was really a stickler. You know, we don't really think that what that guy said was. So that's what brought you down. Here's how to fix it. Yeah.
At what point do you find out who PO is, and like how do you?
So I said very, very early on. As soon as you think you're going to apply to NIH, how do you find out? Sometimes it's obvious. You ask around. Sometimes you Google. You find a grant in a reporter that's close to your area, and you'll find out who the project officer is. And if you don't know how to do it, call me. I will help you. That's what I'm here to do. Okay? But if you have a relationship with the project officer, you don't have to call me. And it's not like, oh, why didn't you go through me? No. If you have a good relationship with the project officer because you're on a K23 now you're on an R01, go for it. Right? But if you have trouble finding that person and it's not clear, call me. That's what I'm here to do. Council, as I said, is the rubber stamping. Basically, it's the board of directors, and you can't get funded until they approve your grant. So if your grant got reviewed at the study section, but for whatever reason, council was snowed out, or it's going to wait 2 months from the score just to get reviewed by council. So adds another 2 months. You know you've got a funded study. You know you're going to get funded, right? You're really excited, and you want to start. You can't. Not a penny will be released to you until it's approved by council. Okay? So they're really the board of directors, and they can also provide redress in terms of when there are people who think they got an unfair shot, and they're taken very seriously, those kind of things. They're usually dealt with by the project officer, but they may rise to the level of council when it's a big deal. And if you don't win, if you don't get it, well, revise and review and revise and submit. You can do it once, you can do it twice, and then if you don't get it, you just tweak it, give it a new name, away you go. And each time you'll iteratively you'll improve it. And stick at it. Really stick at it. Okay? I went from oh my God, unfunded study. What a waste of time that was. And it wasn't even a fair study. The things they got me on are ridiculous. I went from that to next round, improve, sat down, took a breath, showed, with the cover letter you say, they told me about X, I've improved X in this way, and it went from, as I say, an unfunded to a funded study in 2006. The study was finally finished earlier last year. And the manuscript is in JAMA, and holy crap, it doesn't work. Sorry, I so much wanted this to work. It turns out now, first and the biggest randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial where we did CT scans to follow up. We did everything right to make this work. We didn't get a signal. Very disappointed. It took a long time to get there from Bethesda, but all those years ago. But that's what happened. So I'm here to help. Everybody else at NIH is here to help, and I mean this. It's a big deal to apply. It's not as big a deal as you think. Once you figure out there's only a few grant mechanisms that I'm likely to use, there's only a handful of institutes that NIH is likely to use. So for instance, we do have somebody who's funded from the National Institute, I don't even remember their full name, on communicable disorders and deafness, or deafness and communicable disorders. One of those things. Because his study is on acute vertigo in the ED. Oh, clever, right? Clever. Right? So his study's on vertigo, and so he got fun, but I don't know anybody else who's used that mechanism. Going to that institute. But by and large, you're all going to use the same few studies, and you're all going to apply to the same few places, and so it's not as daunting, as baffling as you might have thought. So I encourage you to do this. You're here to learn how to do this. I want to just thank Scott for putting this all together, and I don't know who else was on your team, but really a fabulous job. And I saw your name recently. What did you get awarded?
Okay, probably, but that was a while ago.
Oh, I thought I saw your name.
Right?
Oh, okay.
So I've had an SAEM RTG, which is like sort of K-like, and then turn that into a K. And
Tony, thank you, Scott, for allowing me to share this with you. Those are the pearls. As I say, it's not that difficult. Okay? It's not rocket science. It's just a grant from the National Institutes of Health. And I will say one more thing. That process is a long process, right? We understand that. It has to be long because of all the steps. But at the end of the day, we're talking about taxpayer money. I don't want to sound like a politician. But if you're giving out $5 million of taxpayer money from teachers and firefighters, right, you want to be very, very sure that you're doing the right thing with that money. And so I really, when you put it in that perspective, well, come on, it's a lot of money you're asking for. And once you get it, you're going to run with it. So we want to really make sure that we do the right thing, not only by science, but by the taxpayer as well. So I think that's a very important thing to finish on. I'm happy, as I said, to be asked questions formally, informally. This is my email. Oh, that's the wrong phone number because I moved institutes. You'll find me. Feel free, not formal, call me up. Hey, it's best if you. One more thing on this, I'll end. If you are going to talk to a project officer, the first thing they will say to you, or I will say to you, is, great, send me like a half-a-page research plan, what you want to do, why you want to do it, and what you think is going to happen. Only like two paragraphs, no more, because that gives us something to talk about. Don't call me up and say, well, I've got these. I have an idea, not really sure, no, I haven't really spoken to other people. Okay. I'll field those calls. They'll be very nice, usually. But you really want to have something concrete. I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think? And then that project officer will read it, and she'll either send it around or tweak it, and then we'll build up from there. Thank you very much for your attention.